They called her untouchable, the youngest billionaire CEO in the city. But the moment she stepped into that car, everything changed. A single dad, with tired eyes and a quiet fire in his voice, looked at her and said, "Shut up, if you want to stay alive." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, and the beginning of a story that would unravel betrayal, redemption, and the kind of love no one saw coming. This one might just stay with you long after the credits roll. The moment Morgan Lane opened the car door, the world, her world, shifted. She didn't know it yet, but everything she believed about control, loyalty, and safety was about to collapse. She slid into the back seat of her sleek black limousine, the leather still warm from the sun, phone in hand, her mind racing with numbers, projections, and power plays. The deal of the decade, worth nearly $1 billion, was scheduled to finalize in 48 hours. She had built Lynxtel from a single rented office above a laundromat into the most powerful telecommunications empire on the East Coast. She was calm, focused, in command, until a man's voice cut through the silence. "Shut up! Don't say a word." Morgan froze. The door had barely shut when her eyes flicked to the front seat. The driver wasn't Greg, her usual chauffeur. The man behind the wheel had dark, tousled hair, a chiseled jaw that bore the light stubble of someone who hadn't slept well in days, and a military steadiness in the way he held the steering wheel. His eyes didn't leave the rearview mirror, but they weren't threatening. They were alert, urgent. She reached for the hidden panic button in the side panel. "Don't," he said sharply. "If they're listening, you'll trigger exactly what they want." "What is this?" she snapped, her voice tight. "Who are you?" "I'm Mason Carter. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stop them from destroying you." Her hand froze midair. "Them?" He nodded once. "Emma Vale and your board liaison from Axitel. They're setting you up. And if you say the wrong thing right now, they'll know you're catching on." Morgan blinked. The name Emma Vale, her CFO, her best friend of 2 decades, rattled in her skull like broken glass. Before she could speak again, a small sound rose from the back seat. A soft yawn. She turned slightly and saw her. A little girl, maybe 6, curled up beneath a soft plaid blanket on the far side of the bench seat. Her cheeks were flushed with sleep, her tiny tennis shoes still caked with playground dust. The child stirred, blinked once at Morgan, then nestled back into the blanket. Morgan stared at her, stunned. "There's a child in my car." "My daughter," Mason said, softer now. "Ellie. I don't leave her alone after what happened last year. She's safe. You are too. For now." Morgan's mind raced. Is this a threat? A ploy? A trap? But his voice lacked menace. If anything, he sounded exhausted. Real. She glanced down at her phone. No signal. The call she had been about to make, cancelled before it began. "How did you get this job?" she asked carefully. "Temporary contract. Your assistant replaced your driver last minute today. Told dispatch Greg had a family emergency. But Greg didn't know anything about it." Morgan's breath hitched. The security pass, the route, the calendar change. Emma made this morning. It all clicked, and for the first time in a decade, she felt the ground beneath her tilt. "I overheard them last night," Mason said, voice low. "They were speaking near the north stairwell, thought no one was around. Said tomorrow you'd be too distracted to read the fine print. Said you'd be out before you even realized you were being played." Morgan looked out the tinted window. The city blurred past. Buildings she had built, departments she had mentored, executives who owed her their entire careers. She had given everything to Lynxtel, and now someone was trying to take it from her. Quietly, surgically. And the only warning she got was from a man she didn't know and a little girl sleeping beside her. You expect me to believe this? She asked, more to herself than him. No, Mason said, pulling into a quiet side street near a rundown park. I expect you to listen and to stay alive long enough to verify it. Why would I trust you? He met her eyes in the rearview mirror, his jaw tight. Because I have nothing to gain by warning you, and everything to lose if I don't. My daughter already lost her mother. I won't let her watch someone else get destroyed by people who smile to your face while sharpening the knife behind your back. Morgan opened her mouth to reply, but found no words. The street was silent now. Ellie stirred again, opened her eyes, and looked directly at Morgan. You're the lady from the picture, the girl said sleepily. Morgan blinked. What picture? Ellie yawned. Grandma had one of you. She said you used to smile more. Morgan's heart stuttered. The air inside the car shifted, heavy with something unspoken. Before she could ask another question, Mason turned slightly. You don't have to believe me, but check the documents you're signing tomorrow. Have Ethan, your legal guy, review the footnotes on Clause 14C, the one about foreign equity redistribution. They changed it. Quietly. That's your leverage, but only if you act fast. How do you know about Clause 14C? I listen. It's what you do when the world stops listening to you. A pause stretched between them. Morgan looked at the man in the front seat. A stranger. A single dad. A ghost from the company's past who had somehow reappeared at the exact moment everything was about to fall apart. And yet, the way he looked at her wasn't with fear or admiration or contempt. It was with the urgency of someone who had seen too many things go wrong and couldn't bear to see another. Morgan exhaled slowly. Her world, once immaculately controlled, had just been flipped by 2 words from a man she'd never met. Shut up. And now, she knew she couldn't afford not to listen. The car sat motionless beneath the skeletal arms of a dying oak, the late afternoon sun streaking through its branches in fractured golden beams. Morgan Lane had built her career reading faces, dissecting motives, and trusting no one. But now she sat still in her own car, flanked by a stranger and his sleeping daughter, absorbing a story that made her question everything. I worked at Lynxtel, Mason said without turning around. 5 years ago, overnight security, quiet post, basement level. Morgan studied the back of his head, the way his shoulders tensed like a man waiting for judgment. I don't remember you, she said flatly. You weren't supposed to. Most people didn't. I was just the guy who walked halls no one cared about. But I paid attention, always did. He finally turned, just enough to glance at her over his shoulder. Until one night, a shipment came in after hours. I flagged it as unauthorized. Within 48 hours, I was let go for insubordination. Morgan's eyes narrowed. That's not how we operate. Maybe not how you wanted to operate, Mason replied. But it's how they did. The ones who smile in meetings and cut throats in parking garages. You built something incredible. They're carving it up. His voice wasn't bitter. It was matter of fact. Like a firefighter describing a building going up in flames he couldn't save. She wanted to dismiss him, to claim ignorance or coincidence. But the word insubordination scratched at something. An HR report, a minor incident Ethan once waved off. And now you're, what? A chauffeur with a vendetta, she asked. I'm a father with a conscience. That shut her up. He gestured to the back seat. When my wife died 3 years ago, I made a promise to Ellie that I'd never let anything take her safety away again. Not the streets, not the system, not corrupt men in suits. Morgan shifted, folding her arms. What exactly did you hear? Mason reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recorder. I was cleaning one of the auxiliary boardrooms. I'm not supposed to use this. Company policy. But after what happened to me, I kept it. Just in case. He pressed play. Static. Then voices. Clear. Familiar. Emma's voice. Cheerful. Calculated. She won't even read the full document. She trusts me too much. Always has. That's her weakness. Then a deeper voice. Greer Thomas. Axie tells liaison. Clause 14C is buried deep. We get a signature and the equity rights transfer within 90 days. Emma laughed. By the time she realizes what happened, she'll be fighting us from the sidewalk. Morgan's stomach turned. That recording alone could sink both of them, she whispered, her throat dry. Mason nodded. But only if you act before the signing. She felt it then, something crawling up the back of her spine. Not just betrayal, exposure. She had let them in, had shared hotel rooms with Emma on business trips, sent holiday gifts to her children. Morgan had prided herself on loyalty, on keeping her circle tight. They had used it like a rope to strangle her. Before she could respond, a soft voice broke the silence. "Miss Morgan?" "Ellie." She was sitting up now, her blanket sliding to the floor, her big hazel eyes blinking at the light filtering through the tinted glass. Morgan turned to her, startled. "Hi, sweetheart. I didn't realize you were awake." The girl rubbed her eyes, then tilted her head curiously. "Are you okay? You look mad and scared, like when Daddy saw that lady yelling at the store." Morgan blinked. "No, I mean, yes, I'm just thinking." Ellie leaned forward slightly. "Is it because of the lady with yellow hair?" Mason turned in his seat. "Ellie." But the little girl continued, unbothered. "She told the man in the black coat that tomorrow you'd be broke and begging. I heard her say it when I was waiting in the hallway outside Daddy's work." Morgan's blood ran cold. "You saw her?" Ellie nodded. She was laughing and said, "After tomorrow, Morgan Lane will be eating out of trash cans." Then she said a bad word. "I won't repeat it." Morgan couldn't move. A 6-year-old had casually confirmed the betrayal her brain was still struggling to process. How did you know it was me?" she asked gently. Ellie smiled. "Grandma had a picture of you. Said you helped build phones that could talk to the sky. She said you used to be kind." Morgan stared at her. Used to be. She looked down at her hands, perfectly manicured, cold. She didn't remember the last time someone called her kind. "I think she was wrong," Ellie added softly. "You're still kind, just tired." Morgan swallowed hard. Mason cleared his throat, pulling the car into gear. "You need to talk to your lawyer, today, before this gets deeper." Morgan nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The car eased back into traffic, but everything felt different. The skyline ahead, once a symbol of her empire, looked suddenly distant, foreign. She had poured her soul into every steel beam, every deal, every sleepless night. And now, because of a clause in a contract and a friend with ambition, she was a signature away from losing everything. Except now, she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The penthouse was silent, but Morgan Lane's mind was deafening. The moment she stepped out of the elevator into the marble foyer of her top-floor apartment, she kicked off her heels and tossed her handbag on the console table with a little more force than necessary. The city skyline shimmered behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like a billion-dollar trophy case, a monument to her power, her discipline, her vision. But tonight, all she saw was glass, transparent, fragile, breakable. She poured herself a glass of scotch and didn't bother with ice. She stood in the center of the living room, drink in hand, staring at the skyline that had once made her feel invincible. Now, she felt watched. Mason's words echoed in her head like footsteps in an empty hallway. "They're carving it up. Clause 14C. You're being played." And Ellie, that little girl's voice, so innocently certain. She said after tomorrow, you'd be broke and begging. Morgan sank into the leather armchair near the fireplace. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled around the crystal glass. She hated this feeling. Doubt. It crept through her like a slow leak under concrete, impossible to locate, but devastating once it spread. She opened her laptop and brought up the merger documents, hundreds of pages, legal jargon layered like a smokescreen. She'd reviewed them all, or so she thought. Emma had personally delivered the final revisions. Emma, who had been there since the beginning. Emma, who once slept on Morgan's couch during the lean years and toasted with her on the night Lynxtel hit $100 million. Could that Emma be the same woman who laughed about putting her on the street? Morgan clicked on Clause 14C. The language was dense, deliberately so. Redistribution of interim equity entitlements in accordance with accelerated liquidation and restructuring obligations. It was gibberish, but dangerous gibberish. She reached for her phone and tapped the favorite contact. Ethan Reynolds. The man picked up on the second ring. "Morgan," he said, his voice as composed and gravelly as ever. "Tell me you're not working at this hour. I need to see you. Now." A pause. "At the office?" "No, come to the penthouse." "Is something wrong?" Morgan closed her laptop, jaw clenched. "Just come, Ethan. Please." 15 minutes later, he arrived, tie loosened, trench coat wet from the rain that had begun to mist over the city. He looked older than usual, the silver in his beard catching the light as he stepped inside. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Have you looked at Clause 14C?" she asked, motioning to the document open on the screen. He leaned over the desk, reading. After a few quiet moments, he frowned. "This wasn't in the draft we reviewed last quarter." "I know." He scrolled further, his brows knitting. "This clause effectively shifts equity control to a shared third-party shell, which based on this language could be tied to Axitel. And if the paperwork is finalized, they take control of my company within 90 days, she finished. Ethan looked up. "You didn't approve this?" "No," Morgan said quietly. "But Emma did." He took a step back. "You're saying Emma planted this. I'm saying I don't know who I trust anymore." She poured another 2 fingers of scotch and downed it in one clean motion. "Who tipped you off?" he asked. Morgan hesitated. Ethan noticed. "Morgan? Who?" "A former employee, Mason Carter, used to work security. I remember him. Quiet guy. Got fired for," he paused, "insubordination. But I recall his personnel file. Clean before that. He said he overheard Emma and Axitel's rep plotting. He recorded it. And his daughter overheard Emma say I'd be broke and begging after tomorrow." Ethan ran a hand over his mouth. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just sabotage. It's corporate fraud." Morgan sat down, suddenly exhausted. "I keep trying to convince myself this is paranoia, that I'm reading into it. But Ethan, the calendar changes, the rescheduled driver, the last-minute contract revisions. It's like I've been sleepwalking toward a trap." Ethan studied her. "Do you want me to go to the board?" "No." She shook her head. "Not yet. I want more than suspicion. I want proof." He nodded. "Then we need to follow the paper trail." Morgan stood, suddenly restless. She walked to the tall windows, watching her reflection hover against the cityscape. Something hardened in her chest. "I want access to Emma's communications," she said. Ethan stiffened. "That's a legal landmine, Morgan. Surveillance without consent. Even internal, it's risky, especially without probable cause or authorization." "She's on my payroll, using my equipment. In my company," Morgan said, her tone sharp. "I need to know if she's selling me out before I walk into that boardroom and sign away everything I've built." Ethan hesitated. If we get caught monitoring employee devices without policy authorization, I'm not asking you to do it. I'll do it myself. Then I'm advising you to tread very carefully. Morgan turned back to him. You think I'm wrong? Ethan's gaze was steady. I think you're scared, and for good reason. But fear clouds judgment. Be sure, before you cross a line you can't uncross. Morgan exhaled, steadying her breath. She wasn't used to fear. She wasn't used to doubt. But something deep in her gut, the same instinct that helped her rise from nothing, was screaming now. A cold, clear siren in the fog. She glanced at her phone, then back to Ethan. I want to set a digital decoy, she said. A fake message chain. Schedule a call that doesn't exist. See who shows up. Ethan's eyes flickered. Then he nodded. Now that is legal. Morgan's lips curled into a thin, focused line. For the first time all night, she felt like herself again. Not the betrayed friend, not the woman being hunted, but the hunter, arming herself in silence. The seed of doubt had been planted, and soon she would see who bloomed from it, and who buried themselves. The diner was nearly empty, bathed in flickering fluorescent light, and the low hum of a neon open 24 hours sign that buzzed like a tired heartbeat. The scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air, blending with the faint aroma of grilled onions and old leather booths. Morgan Lane sat near the window, her trench coat folded neatly beside her, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug she hadn't sipped. Across from her, Mason Carter stirred his black coffee slowly, not out of need, but out of habit, like a man used to silence filling space where words didn't belong. Outside the glass, Ellie danced under the soft drizzle, her yellow rain boots splashing puddles as she twirled with the unbothered freedom only children possess. Her laugh echoed faintly through the glass, bright and out of place in the otherwise somber setting. Morgan watched the little girl, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips before she remembered herself, and forced it away. I haven't been in a place like this in years, she said softly, trying to ground herself in something real. Feels like a time capsule. Same menu since 1992, Mason replied, his voice calm but rough-edged. Same waitress, same broken jukebox in the corner that plays the same 3 Patsy Cline songs on loop. He looked up, his eyes catching hers for the first time that evening. Only thing that changes is the people who forget it exists. Morgan exhaled, her walls slowly lowering. Why did you reach out again? She asked, cutting through the small talk. Because you needed to know, he said. And because nobody else was going to tell you. She studied him. The lines on his face weren't from age, but from weather. Storms endured, not years passed. There was a sadness in him, but it wasn't self-pity. It was restraint, like a man who had seen too much and learned not to speak unless it mattered. I looked into your record, Morgan said. You were fired for refusing to let in an unscheduled delivery. They called it insubordination. Mason leaned back. I called it integrity. But corporate doesn't like gray areas, especially when the truth costs money. She took a breath, unsure whether to speak what sat on the edge of her conscience. Then, why me? You could have walked away, stayed out of it. He didn't hesitate. Because I watched a woman just like you lose everything. Morgan's brow furrowed. I was stationed in D.C. right after I left the force, he continued. Private security for a hedge fund CEO. She was sharp, built everything from scratch, just like you. But she trusted the wrong people. A friend. A lover. Someone who smiled while tightening the noose. He looked past her, his voice tightening. She came into work one morning, and by noon, she didn't know her name anymore. Morgan felt her chest constrict. The parallels were too sharp. I told myself if I ever saw it happening again, I wouldn't stay silent. She looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest recognition that she might not be standing alone in the dark. At that moment, Ellie burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold, rainwater dripping from the brim of her pink hoodie. "Daddy, I made a puddle angel," she declared proudly. Mason grinned. "Hope it's not in front of someone's tire." The girl plopped beside him, swinging her legs beneath the booth. Her eyes landed on Morgan, curious and open. "Miss Morgan, do you like pancakes?" Morgan blinked. "Depends. Are they magic pancakes?" Ellie tilted her head, as if genuinely considering. "They're not magic, but if you eat the edges first, you get more syrup in the middle." Mason laughed under his breath, and even Morgan chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. Then Ellie's face shifted, her smile faded as her gaze wandered out the window. "I used to live near someone like you," she said quietly. Morgan turned to her gently. "Like me?" The little girl nodded. She wore fancy shoes and always walked fast, like the world was chasing her. She never smiled. Not even once. Morgan felt her throat tighten. "She lived in the brick building across from our shelter," Ellie continued. "She never talked to anyone, but sometimes she looked like she wanted to." Mason touched his daughter's shoulder softly, but Ellie wasn't finished. "One day she'd disappeared. I asked where she went, and a worker said, probably somewhere colder. I don't think they meant weather." Morgan swallowed, emotions swirling. It was a strange thing, to be seen so clearly by a child who knew nothing about your life, but everything about your loneliness. "I'm sorry," Morgan whispered. Ellie smiled faintly. "It's okay. But when I saw you, I thought maybe—" She came back. Silence hung in the air, and then, for the first time in a long time, Morgan Lane didn't feel like a woman climbing an ivory tower, but a human being sitting in a booth at midnight, learning that sometimes strangers notice the things closest to your heart. "I don't know how to do this," Morgan said suddenly, her voice raw. "Not the fight. I've done that all my life. But this part, the people part." Mason looked at her, no judgment in his eyes. "You don't have to be good at it," he said. "You just have to be honest." Outside, the rain picked up. Inside, the jukebox clicked and wheezed and played a scratchy version of Crazy. And in a quiet corner booth of a forgotten diner, 3 unlikely souls shared something fragile and real. The beginning of trust. The walls of Morgan Lane's office had never felt so cold. Not from the autumn air whispering through the towering glass windows, but from something deeper, an invisible draft that curled through the silence like smoke. Distrust, the kind that settled into corners and waited. Morgan sat alone behind her desk, the city skyline stretching far and wide behind her, like a kingdom she no longer knew how to defend. Her fingers hovered above her keyboard, the screen still open to a private server she rarely used. Passwords had been reset, access logs activated. Her cybersecurity team believed she was conducting a routine audit. But this wasn't routine. It was personal. The name blinking in her search bar. Emma Vale, her friend, her right hand, the woman who held her schedule, her secrets, and, perhaps now, her downfall. The data access reports had revealed irregular patterns, files opened after hours, documents downloaded without authorization, all tied to Emma's login. At first, Morgan told herself it had to be a mistake, a glitch, maybe even a shared credential used in haste. But then came the footage. She hadn't expected to find it. The elevators on the executive level weren't typically monitored with sound, but thanks to a recent upgrade, installed after a theft scare in R&D, a handful of units now featured discrete audio-visual capture. No one thought to check them. No one but Morgan. She clicked the video. It was time-stamped 9:47 p.m., 4 nights ago. The grainy footage flickered to life, showing Emma stepping into the elevator in her tailored navy coat, phone pressed to her ear. At first, her voice was muffled beneath the hum of the machinery, but as the doors closed, the audio sharpened. "Morgan, she'll sign anything if I put it in a leather folder and smile." Morgan's stomach dropped. "No, I'm serious. She still thinks I'm the girl who used to crash on her couch. She doesn't realize I outgrew the act years ago." A long pause. Then laughter. "She built the kingdom, sure. But I'm the one who knows where the foundations are cracked. After tomorrow, she won't own a thing she built." Morgan froze the screen. Her breath caught in her chest. A ragged thing. Half air, half grief. She'd expected betrayal before. In business, in politics, in boardrooms full of men who called her darling before stabbing her in the back. But never from Emma. Not from the person who held her hand when her father died, who toasted her with boxed wine when they signed their first office lease, who once painted Morgan's apartment walls because Morgan couldn't afford real wallpaper. She felt hollow, a slow, creeping kind of devastation. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed the window. The footage was already copied to a secure drive. Ethan would know what to do with it. But legal consequences were one thing. Emotional fallout was another. She sat back, eyes tracing the sharp lines of the ceiling, the steel beams exposed like ribs. Her mind rewound to 100 moments. Coffee shared on rainy mornings, phone calls at midnight, Christmas cards signed, your other half in crime. Had it all been theater? Or had Emma simply changed? The elevator chimed outside her door. Morgan straightened as footsteps approached. A knock. Then the door opened. Emma, poised, polished. The same woman she'd known for 20 years, dressed in winter white and wearing that signature smile, the one that made people feel safe. "Hey, stranger," Emma said, closing the door behind her. "You've been a ghost all morning." Morgan forced her tone into neutrality. "I've had a lot on my plate." Emma approached, placing a file on the desk. "I finalized the talking points for the Japanese investor meeting. Thought you'd want to look them over." Morgan didn't reach for the file. Emma raised a brow. "Everything okay?" There it was. That voice. So familiar. So dangerous now. Morgan kept her expression unreadable. "You ever think about the first year, when it was just us? One laptop, 2 folding chairs, and a dream that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation." Emma chuckled. "How could I forget? We were children pretending to be titans." Morgan nodded slowly. "Yeah." A long pause. Silence filled the room like rising water. Then Morgan leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Do you still believe in what we built, Emma?" Something flickered across Emma's face, quick, subtle. Surprise? Or calculation? "Of course I do," she replied smoothly. "Why would you even ask that?" Morgan's heart twisted. She wanted to believe her. She needed to. But the footage was real. The access logs were real. And the betrayal was already complete. She forced a smile. Just being nostalgic, I guess. Emma tilted her head, studying her. Then she smiled back, warm and easy. "Well, don't go soft on me now, Lane. We've got an empire to protect." And with that, she turned and walked out. Morgan watched the door close behind her, then leaned back, the weight of the moment sinking in like iron in her chest. The woman she'd trusted with her life had just handed that life to the highest bidder. But not anymore. Morgan Lane had always been a builder. And now, she was ready to rebuild without the rot. Morgan Lane had faced down billionaires, senators, and hostile takeovers, with a steel composure that had become legend in boardrooms across the country. But nothing prepared her for the emotional debris left by betrayal. By the time she left her office that night, the city had slipped into quiet rain, the kind that didn't drench, but whispered against the windows, soft and persistent. She didn't go home. Home felt too sharp, too clean. Instead, she found herself driving through dim, residential streets, her mind chasing itself in circles. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter with each mile. Why Emma? Why now? Was it always a performance? She didn't even realize she had pulled into the small diner parking lot until she saw Mason's beat-up Ford truck already there, parked crooked, as if in a hurry. Inside, the lights were warm, flickering gently through the rain-slicked glass. It was the only place that felt untouched by the coldness she carried now. She walked in quietly. The bell above the door gave its familiar chime. Mason looked up from a booth in the corner, nodding once. Ellie was with him, curled in the seat with a coloring book and a bowl of mac and cheese. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Morgan slid into the booth across from them, rain still glistening on her coat sleeves. "You look like someone just stole your name," Mason said, not unkindly. She tried to smile, failed, and shook her head. "It's worse. They tried to make me sign it away myself." Ellie looked up at her, fork in hand. "That sounds bad." "It is, sweetheart," Morgan replied softly. Then she glanced at Mason. The footage was real. Emma was on the elevator call. She said everything Carter said she did. And more. Mason's jaw tightened. "You gonna confront her?" Morgan leaned back against the booth, letting her head rest for a moment. "No, not yet. If I move too soon, they'll cover their tracks. I need to let them think I'm still the fool." He nodded, understanding. "And in the meantime..." "In the meantime," she exhaled, "I try to survive the part where I pretend I'm not bleeding." A silence settled over the booth, the soft clinking of dishes and the hum of the fridge filling in the spaces. Morgan stared at the condensation running down her water glass, her reflection warped in the surface. Then Ellie spoke. "You know when something feels wrong, even if you can't say why?" Morgan looked at her, intrigued. "You mean like a hunch?" Ellie shrugged. "Kind of. Like when Daddy says someone is off, even if they're smiling. Or when you eat chicken nuggets and they taste fine, but your stomach hurts before dinner's even over." Morgan smiled faintly. "I suppose that's instinct." Ellie nodded. "That's what Grandma called it. Instinct. She said our bodies sometimes know before our brains catch up." Morgan watched her quietly, struck by the sincerity of this tiny philosopher in sparkly leggings. Then Ellie asked, carefully, "Do you still trust the lady with the yellow hair?" Morgan hesitated. "I don't know. I want to say no, but you used to trust her," Ellie said matter-of-factly. "Yes." "Then maybe your heart's confused," Ellie offered. "But your stomach isn't." Morgan blinked. "My stomach," Ellie nodded again. "Solemn. Every time someone lies to me, my tummy hurts. Does yours hurt when you think about her?" The question landed with quiet force. Morgan didn't answer right away, because the truth was, yes. Yes, it did. It ached. A dull, gnawing pain that had started when Mason first spoke her name in suspicion and hadn't left since. The same pain she hadn't felt since her mother. Morgan's breath caught. She was 6, maybe 7. Her mother had promised she'd come back in a week, said she just needed space. Morgan had waited by the door for days, refusing to eat. She remembered the twisting knot in her belly, the way her insides had screamed what her mind refused to believe. She's not coming back. That same ache was back now, the one no business deal could outbid. She looked at Ellie, eyes stinging. "You're a very wise little girl." Ellie gave a tiny smile. "Grandma said the best people hear the quietest truths." Morgan turned away quickly, blinking hard, but not fast enough, because in that moment the pain cracked open, and the tears came. Not loud, not messy, just quiet drops sliding down her cheeks, catching on her jawline, like something that had waited too long finally being allowed to move. Mason reached across the table and slid a napkin toward her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Morgan wiped her face, then laughed once through the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I haven't cried in years." Mason leaned back, arms folded. "That's not strength, that's survival." She nodded. "I know." For a while, they just sat there, listening to the rain outside, the weight of the world briefly suspended between the plastic-coated menus and ketchup bottles. Then Ellie, mouthful of macaroni, asked, "Does this mean you're going to beat the bad guys now?" Morgan smiled through her tears. "Yes. Yes, it does." "Good," Ellie said, "because I like you better when you look like fire." Morgan looked at her, really looked, and something inside her shifted. Fire. She'd forgotten what it felt like to burn for something other than ambition. Now, she burned for justice, for truth, and for the little girl across the table who had seen through her armor in a single sentence. "If you still trust her, why does your stomach hurt when you hear her name?" The morning broke with a heavy sky, thick with a storm that hadn't yet begun. Morgan stood at the window of her penthouse, coffee untouched in her hand, watching the horizon blur into grey. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, sharp suit, tired eyes, and something behind them that hadn't been there a week ago. Resolve. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Wells. One new message. "You need to see this. Now." 15 minutes later, Morgan walked into Ethan's office, his sanctuary of chaos. Stacks of legal files towered like miniature cities across the mahogany desk, and law books lined the walls, spines cracked from decades of overuse. But Ethan himself stood in the middle, arms crossed, brows furrowed, eyes stormy. He didn't offer coffee. That alone told her this wasn't business as usual. "I stayed up all night," he began. "Ran a deep forensic trace on every document you've signed in the last 2 years, cross-referenced metadata, server logs, even flagged printing behavior from your executive floor." Morgan's chest tightened. "And," he tapped a folder, "Emma's been funneling confidential projections, financial forecasts, and legal briefings to a private server. That server's registered in the Caymans, linked to a shell company named Hollowgate Holdings." Morgan tilted her head. "That name means nothing to me." "It will," he replied, flipping open the folder. Inside were screenshots of encrypted emails, transaction logs, wire transfers. One in particular was circled in red. A payment of $2.6 million, made 6 weeks ago. Recipient, Emma Blake. Sender, Axitel Incorporated. Morgan stared. Axitel. Ethan nodded grimly. "They've been trying to break into biotech for years. Your merger with Virion Labs would give them everything. Patents, supply chains, research teams. Emma was the perfect inside hand. All she had to do was manipulate you into signing off on clauses that looked routine, but would open the door wide enough for Axitel to stage a hostile asset takeover." Morgan's hands were ice. "And if I had signed, you wouldn't just lose the company," Ethan said. "You could be indicted for securities fraud. Axitel would claim you misrepresented the value of your company by hiding internal knowledge. You'd be painted as the villain." Morgan took a step back, as if the papers had just hissed. "She was setting me up." Ethan looked at her, something fatherly in his gaze. "It's not just betrayal, Morgan. It's entrapment. And it's been going on for 18 months. She sat down slowly, the weight of it pressing into her bones. 18 months. That was before her father died, before she inherited full control. Emma had been planning this from the moment Morgan became CEO. "How did I miss this?" she whispered. "How did I not see her changing?" Ethan's voice softened, because she didn't change all at once. She eroded, slowly. She didn't break your trust. She wore it down like a river carving through stone. Morgan closed her eyes, swallowing the bitterness rising in her throat. "I trusted her with everything. With my life." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the storm outside beginning to show signs of life. A low rumble, the wind shaking the windows slightly. It matched the thunder building inside her chest. Morgan finally stood. "We need to take this to the board, and the SEC. Ethan hesitated. "You sure you want to go public this soon?" "If I wait, they'll move faster. They'll bury whatever evidence they haven't already wiped." She looked him dead in the eye. "No more waiting. I'm not the girl who stands at the door hoping betrayal changes its mind." Ethan gave a tight nod. "Then I'll prepare the brief." As she turned to leave, he added, "Morgan, don't let this break you." She paused at the door. "It won't," she said, steel in her voice. "It's building me." Back in her car, she sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering with white knuckles. The betrayal echoed in her chest like footsteps in an empty hall. But layered beneath it now was something else. Clarity. Everything Mason had said, everything Ellie had felt. It all snapped into place like pieces of a long-lost puzzle. Ellie. She reached for her phone and called Mason. He answered after the first ring. Did she lie? "She sold me for $2.6 million. There was a pause. Then Mason's voice, steady. "I'm sorry." Morgan blinked hard. "Don't be. You warned me. You saved me. Again." "She's not done," Mason said. "People like her don't stop until the spotlight's on them." "I know," Morgan said quietly, "which is why we're going to shine it brighter than ever." She hung up and stared ahead. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel trapped in a collapsing world. She felt like a woman standing in front of the ruins, ready to rebuild. And this time, brick by brick, she would build it in truth, with the right people, with no illusions, with fire. The office that once hummed with the quiet assurance of control now felt foreign to Morgan Lane. She walked through the towering glass halls of Lane Tech's headquarters like a ghost in her own empire. Smiles felt forced. Conversations quieted as she passed. A new tension hung in the air, tight, almost metallic. Morgan could smell it. Fear mixed with betrayal. She entered her office, the door clicking softly behind her. The skyline stretched endlessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But today, it felt less like power, and more like a prison. Her phone buzzed. Internal memo subject. Executive temporary's leave of absence from Emma Blake. To all staff, effective immediately, Ms. Morgan Lane will be on a temporary wellness leave, as per recommendations from our executive health partners. Leadership responsibilities will be delegated accordingly. We ask all staff and media to respect her privacy during this period. Morgan's breath caught. Wellness leave. Her heart pounded as she read it again. She hadn't approved this. She hadn't even discussed it. A knock rattled her door. Emma entered without waiting for a response, smiling like nothing was broken. Dressed in perfect corporate polish, she carried herself like she already owned the place. "I wanted to deliver the message personally," Emma said, as if this were a courtesy, not a coup. Morgan stood, slow and deliberate. "You're pushing me out." Emma blinked innocently. "Of course not. But your recent behavior has caused concern. Talking to ex-employees, skipping board briefings, erratic hours. You've been under strain, Morgan. And I think you'll agree this break is long overdue." Morgan narrowed her eyes. "And telling the media I'm unstable, that I'm suffering from a neurological disorder." Emma's smile didn't waver. "Oh, come on. I never said that outright. But journalists fill in blanks, don't they? Especially when fed the right breadcrumbs." Morgan's jaw clenched. "You want to discredit me before I speak." "No," Emma said sweetly. "I want to save you the embarrassment when you do." Morgan didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked to a desk, pulled out a folder, and placed it calmly in front of Emma. Inside, Ethan's legal brief, timestamps, transactions, proof of the betrayal. Emma's fingers barely brushed the cover. "That won't save you." Morgan smiled, cold and fierce. "I'm not here to be saved. I'm here to win." Later that night, in a quiet booth of a 24-hour diner, Mason sat across from her, fury bubbling beneath his usually controlled demeanor. "She told the press you were losing your mind," he said, voice low but sharp. "That you were hallucinating, paranoid. That's not just manipulation, Morgan. That's character assassination." She stirred her black coffee without looking up. "I know. I say we go public. I'll talk. We show them everything. Every document, every threat, every message." She looked at him then, her gaze steady. "No." Mason leaned forward, fists clenched. "Why not?" "Because if I fight this with noise, I lose the message. If I turn this into a scandal, I let them write the narrative." "You're already losing control of the narrative." "I'm taking it back," she said firmly. "But not with gossip. Not with a messy leak. I will win this with strategy, not screaming. I will win with truth." Mason exhaled, clearly struggling to hold back. She softened. "Look, I know you want to help. But if you go public, they'll turn you into a tabloid puppet. Ex-security guard turned whistleblower with a vendetta. It will only discredit everything we found." He looked away, jaw tight. She reached across the table, gently covering his hand with hers. "If I fight," she said, "I have to win with my mind, not with scandal." He met her eyes. "You're braver than I thought." She smiled faintly. "No, just more tired of being underestimated." The next day, Morgan sat alone in her penthouse study, walls lined with decades of accolades, news articles, and photos of her with world leaders and titans of industry. A room that once celebrated her rise now felt like a tomb for her silence. She sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. Not to post on social media, not to leak emails, but to write a plan. A detailed surgical roadmap, one that would expose the corruption without turning it into a circus, one that would quietly shift power back into her hands by playing the long game. She compiled a list of allies, board members she knew still valued integrity, investors who had grown wary of recent decisions, scientists at Virion who had whispered to her in elevators, uncertain of the new direction Emma was pushing. Her phone buzzed again. It was a photo. From Ethan, a snapshot of Emma walking into a private dinner with the CEO of Axitel on a night she'd told the board she was overseas for a wellness conference. Morgan let the image burn into her memory. The fire was no longer in her eyes. It was in her chest, in her breath, in every beat of her heart. She wasn't being pushed out, she was being forged. This was no longer just about saving her company. This was about proving to every woman, every survivor of betrayal, every underestimated mind, that grace and intellect could dismantle even the most calculated treachery. No headlines, no shouting, just truth, laid bare, undeniable, and irreversible. And when the world saw what she had seen, it would not be Morgan Lane they questioned. It would be Emma Blake, The rain that afternoon fell with a kind of sorrowful rhythm, soft but insistent, like the world itself knew truths were about to bleed into the light. Morgan Lane sat in a corner booth of an old library cafe, the kind with cracked leather seats and time-worn books stacked along the windowsills. She didn't pick this place for comfort. She picked it for silence. Ethan arrived 5 minutes late, as he always did. In his 70s now, his hair had surrendered to silver, but his eyes, sharp, world-weary, had lost none of their intelligence. Still, today, they carried something else too. Guilt. He didn't sit immediately. He stood across from her, hesitant, his umbrella dripping at his feet. "You're angry," he said, as if asking permission. "I'm patient," Morgan replied, not coldly, just measured. He lowered himself into the seat with a quiet groan, clasped his hands together on the table, then looked her straight in the eye. "I have something to confess," he said, "and you may very well walk away after." Morgan leaned back but said nothing. "I once worked for Axitel," Ethan began, "a long time ago, before you founded Lane Tech, before your name was on every cover and your ideas changed everything." Morgan's gaze sharpened. "You never mentioned that." "No, because I was ashamed," he admitted. "They recruited me in my mid-50s, said they needed someone with legal integrity, someone to balance their aggressive board. I believed them." He swallowed, and the weight of time settled on his shoulders. 2 years in, they asked me to draft a contract that would have wiped out an entire biotech startup. A startup built by 2 immigrant brothers. Brilliant, but naive. Axitel wanted their patents, but not their presence. Morgan's lips pressed together. "I refused," Ethan said. "Not just refused. I tried to expose it. Went to the press. Went to the brothers. Next thing I knew, I was branded unstable, forced out with a confidentiality clause so tight it nearly choked me." His voice cracked. "They shredded my name in every legal circle. I lost clients, my savings, my pride." Morgan watched him, studying not just his words, but his pain. This wasn't rehearsed. This was a man shedding armor he'd worn too long. "And Emma?" she asked softly. He nodded. "When you brought her on, I recognized her. Not her face, her methods. The way she organized meetings without you. The way she inserted language into contracts last minute, pushed approvals during your travel windows. I'd seen it before. Axitel trains their plants well." "Why didn't you tell me?" Morgan asked, her voice a whisper now, less accusation, more ache. "Because I was afraid," he confessed, eyes glassy. "Afraid you'd think I was paranoid. Or worse, trying to sabotage her because of my past. I thought if I stayed close, I could protect you quietly." He shook his head. "But I failed. Again." Silence lingered between them. Outside, the rain blurred the city into impressionist streaks. Inside, truth settled like dust on old pages. Morgan looked down, then slowly reached across the table. Her hand rested on his. "You didn't fail," she said gently. "You just didn't speak. But you're speaking now. That matters." He blinked, surprised. "You still trust me?" he asked, his voice cracking like old wood. "I trust what you chose to do when it cost you," she replied. "Most people only act when it's easy. You didn't." Ethan lowered his head, relief washing through his frame like a man finally exhaling after holding his breath for years. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he murmured. "But you're getting it anyway," Morgan said with a half-smile. "Because I need allies. And because no one gets through life without breaking somewhere." She leaned back, her eyes fierce again. "Besides, you owe me now." He chuckled, a sound weathered and genuine. "That I do." Morgan pulled a manila folder from her bag, slid it across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "A draft," she said. "A clean one. We rewrite the company charter, close the loopholes she exploited, enforce transparency on all mergers, and restructure voting thresholds. If I'm going to fight Emma, I need to change the system that let her in." Ethan opened it, eyes scanning quickly, a low whistle escaping his lips. "You're turning the rules against her." "I'm turning the rules into justice," Morgan corrected. "And I want your signature on this as legal architect." He looked up at her, eyes misted. "I'm honored." Morgan grinned. "You're just trying to save your legacy." He laughed, then grew serious. "Let's save yours, too." They shook hands, no longer CEO and counsel, no longer boss and subordinate, but equals, bound by shared scars and a common fire. Outside, the rain lightened, as if the city, too, had been holding its breath and finally let it go. That night, Morgan stood alone on her balcony, wind teasing loose strands of hair, city lights flickering below like restless thoughts. She held a photo in her hand, an old one. Her and Emma, 20 years ago, two young women smiling without knowing how sharp the knives would become. She turned it over. On the back, a line Emma once wrote in jest. "You'll be the brains. I'll be the charm." Morgan sighed, folding the photo neatly. It didn't hurt as much anymore. Truth, when spoken out loud, fully, finally, had a strange way of cauterizing old wounds. She looked up at the stars, whispered into the wind. "You picked the wrong woman to betray." The afternoon sun poured in softly through the tall windows of Morgan Lane's penthouse, casting long, honeyed streaks across the hardwood floors. It was the first truly quiet day in weeks. No meetings, no emails, no boardroom betrayals. Just the faint hum of city life below, and the occasional rustle of Ellie's footsteps as she explored the quiet sanctuary of Morgan's home. Morgan sat at the kitchen counter, sipping chamomile tea, her mind only half present. Mason had dropped Ellie off a few hours ago to give her a break, and the girl had taken to the space like it was a castle. Bookshelves, secret corners, paintings. Everything was an adventure. And Morgan, for once, didn't mind the company. Ellie's presence brought something warm, unfiltered, and grounding. That was when Ellie's voice echoed from the next room. "Miss Morgan?" Morgan turned. "Yes, sweetheart." Ellie walked into the kitchen with a photo in her tiny hands, her expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. She held it like a secret the world wasn't supposed to know. "I found this in the bottom drawer of that big cabinet," Ellie said, pointing. I didn't mean to snoop." Morgan smiled gently, setting her mug down. "It's okay. What did you find?" Ellie handed her the photo. It was old, creased at the edges, slightly faded, but still intact. In the image, a woman in her late 40s with soft features and gentle eyes was crouched beside a little girl with long chestnut brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. The woman's arm was wrapped protectively around the child, her eyes locked on the girl with unmistakable affection. The background was a modest backyard, swing set, overgrown hedges, a small garden patch in bloom. Morgan froze. She hadn't seen this photo in over 20 years. "That's me," she said slowly, pointing at the girl. "When I was about 7. Ellie nodded, eyes wide. "And the woman?" Morgan added. Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper, almost afraid to believe it. "That's my grandma." Morgan blinked. "Ellie." "I'm sure," the girl said softly. "That's her. I have pictures of her and my mom. She used to wear that same necklace all the time, the one with the little gold leaf." Morgan brought the photo closer. Her heart skipped. It was the necklace. "That woman," Morgan whispered, more to herself than anyone, "was my nanny. Her name was Carol. She took care of me when my parents were too busy building empires to notice I existed." Ellie's eyes shone with something unnameable. So, we knew each other. Morgan's throat tightened. Yes, she said slowly. I guess in some strange way. We were once family. Ellie looked down at her shoes, fidgeting. She used to tell me stories about a little girl she loved very much. She said that girl was brave and lonely and always looking out windows like she was waiting for something. Morgan's breath hitched. Ellie continued, her voice quiet. She never said your name, but she'd cry sometimes. She'd say she missed her little bird. Morgan sat down, suddenly feeling like the ground beneath her had shifted. I called her that too, she whispered. Birdie. Because when I was scared at night, she'd hum this lullaby and tell me to imagine flying away. A silence settled between them, thick, bittersweet, sacred. Then Ellie reached out and wrapped her small fingers around Morgan's hand. Maybe we were meant to find each other again. Morgan looked at her, eyes stinging. You believe that? Ellie smiled. You helped my daddy when no one else would. I think maybe it's the universe helping you back. Morgan laughed softly through her tears. You're 6. You shouldn't be this wise. Ellie shrugged. Grandma said pain grows people faster. Morgan stood and walked to the cabinet, pulling out an old leather-bound photo album from the same drawer. She sat beside Ellie on the floor and opened it. Page after page revealed a life she had long buried. Birthdays with only Carol in attendance, scraped knees cleaned by gentle hands, tear-streaked cheeks comforted not by parents, but by the one woman who had stayed. She turned to a photo of Carol sitting on the porch steps, her eyes closed in laughter. She left when I turned 11, Morgan said quietly. My parents said she found another job. But I think they pushed her out when she started questioning how they raised me. Ellie rested her head on Morgan's shoulder. She never stopped loving you. Morgan stared at the image, her jaw tight. I never got to say thank you. You are now, Ellie whispered. Morgan closed the album, her heart a blend of grief and healing. This wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just some curious twist of fate. It was a reminder that the past leaves echoes. And sometimes, if we're lucky, those echoes return not to haunt us, but to guide us home. She looked at Ellie again. This child who had cracked open walls Morgan didn't even know she'd built. I want to find her, Morgan said suddenly. I want to know what happened, if she's still alive. Ellie nodded eagerly. Daddy might know. He said Grandma worked in lots of places. Morgan stood, determination coursing through her veins again. It wasn't just about fighting boardroom wolves anymore. It was about reconnecting with the truth of who she was, of who they were. And maybe, just maybe, starting over didn't mean forgetting everything. Sometimes it meant remembering who had loved you first. The air inside the conference room was sterile, but tension clung to it like humidity before a storm. Morgan Lane stood at the edge of her office window, the city sprawling beneath her like a maze of secrets. Below the surface of polished glass and towering ambition, war was brewing. It was time. Morgan turned toward Ethan, seated across the room beside 2 stern-faced agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The older man had swapped his tailored suits for something more subdued, gray slacks, a navy sweater, like a soldier returning to the battlefield, but no longer craving armor, only justice. They'll be meeting in room 18B, Morgan said, voice steady despite the storm inside her. 3:15 sharp. That gives us 35 minutes. Agent Prescott nodded. Our wiretap team is in place, but we still need one of your people on the inside, someone who can plant the mic and initiate conversation. Morgan didn't hesitate. Mason. Ethan raised a brow. You sure about that? He's invisible in this building, Morgan replied, and he's the only one they won't suspect. To them, he's still just a former janitor. She hated the way the words tasted in her mouth, disposable, overlooked. But that invisibility had become Mason Carter's greatest weapon. "Where is he now?" asked Agent Lynn. Morgan glanced at her phone. "In the cafe downstairs, with Ellie." Mason took a slow sip of burnt coffee, his eyes trained on the screen of his burner phone. The plan was simple on paper. Slip into the meeting under the pretense of checking faulty maintenance in the ventilation. Drop a listening device behind the ceiling panel and walk out. But plans never stayed simple in real life, especially when Emma was involved. The same woman who once toasted to Morgan's birthday, who helped build the company from its first seed, was now orchestrating its dismantling. And today, Mason would hear it with his own ears. He checked the time. 3:12. "Ellie," he said gently, leaning toward his daughter. She looked up, her eyes wide and bright beneath a curtain of curls. "Remember what we practiced?" Ellie nodded, suddenly serious. "Go to the front desk. Ask where the bathroom is, then walk toward the blue door. Not the bathroom. That's room 18B. When I hear you whistle Twinkle Twinkle, I open the door and say, 'I'm lost.'" Mason smiled. "Perfect." "You sure I'll be okay?" she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "You're braver than you think." She grinned, then scampered off, her small frame disappearing into the sea of executives and interns. Mason stood, slipped the tiny recording device into his maintenance pouch, and pulled his security badge over his shoulder. He wore the faded green uniform again, the same one from his old days at Lane Tech, patched, but purposeful. He was no longer a ghost. He was the fuse. Room 18B was on the executive wing's second floor, a place where only polished shoes and rehearsed lies usually walked. But Mason moved like he belonged, toolbox in hand, expression blank. Inside the room, Emma and a tall man in a dark suit were already seated. A decanter of scotch stood between them, untouched. Their voices were muffled through the thick door. Mason crouched near the air vent just outside, unscrewing the panel with methodical care. He could hear snippets now. "Once she signs, it's over. Axatel gets controlling shares. The rest is cleanup." "Emma." "And if she hesitates?" "The man." "She won't. She still thinks I'm the only one who cares about her." Mason slipped the recorder into the ceiling tile, tapped the side twice, and the green light blinked. He let out a low, 3-note whistle. 3 seconds later, the door to room 18B creaked open. "Excuse me," a small voice said. "I'm looking for the bathroom." The conversation inside halted. Emma turned her head just enough to see Ellie in the doorway. "Sweetheart, this isn't where you're supposed to be," she said with faux warmth, standing quickly. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, big eyes blinking with feigned confusion. "I'll take her," Mason said, appearing at the door just in time. Emma blinked, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Mason," she asked, cautious, "what are you doing here?" He tapped his badge. Maintenance reported a coolant issue, just checking on airflow. He took Ellie's hand, nodded politely at the suited man, and began to walk away. Emma's gaze lingered on them a beat too long. Then, "Mason, wait." He stopped. Emma stepped forward. "You're not maintenance anymore. You were terminated last year." Mason turned slowly, eyes calm. "Reinstated last month. Special project. You can check with HR." She narrowed her eyes. Ellie squeezed his hand tightly, her little pulse racing. Emma didn't say another word. She turned and shut the door. Back in the hallway, Mason crouched beside Ellie and pulled her into a hug. "You did amazing," he whispered. Ellie looked up at him, her voice trembling but proud. "I was scared. But then I thought, if she used to be Miss Morgan's best friend and still hurt her, She doesn't deserve to scare me." Mason exhaled, full of something between relief and awe. "You're braver than half the adults I know." 30 minutes later, back in Morgan's office, Agent Lynn hit pause on the recorder. Morgan stood frozen. Ethan paced. The voices were crisp. Emma's betrayal, complete. The transfer deal, illegal. The man's identity, confirmed as Axitel's VP of Acquisitions. It was everything they needed. Morgan sat down slowly, her hands trembling not with fear, but resolve. "We have them," she whispered. Ethan nodded. Agent Prescott clicked his pen. "With this, we can issue a cease and investigate order by tomorrow morning." Mason sat in the corner, silent, holding Ellie's small hand in his. Morgan looked over at them. This unexpected duo who had given her more loyalty in 2 weeks than some had in decades. She smiled, not because the battle was over, but because for the first time in a long time, she knew she wasn't fighting alone. The boardroom gleamed with cold perfection. Chrome accents, pristine white marble floors, and a panoramic view of the skyline screamed power. It was the kind of room designed to intimidate, and for years it had worked. But not today. Today, the room would bear witness to something no amount of glass or steel could shield. The truth. At precisely 9 a.m., Emma Sinclair strolled into the room, flanked by 2 Axitel executives, Robert Lang and Dana Price. Her blazer was ivory, her heels sharp, her smile serene. She carried herself like a victor, every step the punctuation of a coup she believed was already written. "Board is running a few minutes behind," she announced smoothly as she placed her sleek leather briefcase on the table. "No worries. I'll handle the presentation before Morgan arrives." She didn't expect Morgan to show. That was the entire point. Lang leaned over. "You're sure she's still on leave?" Emma's smile widened. "Trust me, she's too emotionally unstable to appear in public. Remember, she won't be a problem." But then the doors opened, and in walked the problem. Morgan Lane. Sharp black suit. No makeup, just defiance. Her heels echoed like a war drum against the polished floor. Following behind her were Ethan, Mason, and, unexpectedly, Ellie, holding a small folder in her arms, looking like she had no idea how explosive the contents were. Emma's face froze, but she quickly forced a smile. "Morgan," she greeted, "this is unexpected. I thought you were still on medical leave." Morgan placed a silver USB stick on the table. "Recovery's been enlightening." Lang cleared his throat. "Is this necessary?" "We have final documents to sign. It won't take long," Morgan interrupted, calm but unwavering. "Before I sign anything, I'd like to show a short family video. Humor me." She walked to the wall-mounted display and plugged in the USB. The screen came to life. At first it looked harmless, a grainy security camera feed. But as the audio kicked in, so did the tension. Emma's voice, crisp and unmistakable. "Once she signs, it's over. Axitel gets controlling shares. The rest is cleanup." Gasps rippled around the room. The screen cut to the next clip. A hidden camera inside an elevator. Emma whispering on her phone. "Morgan will sign everything. She's predictable, too trusting. That's always been her flaw." Emma's face drained of color. Lang leaned forward, stunned. "What is this?" "Evidence," Morgan said, "of premeditated corporate sabotage, identity fraud, and insider trading." The next image appeared. Screenshot after screenshot of confidential documents sent from Emma's private email to Axitel servers. Dates, IP addresses, routing numbers. Then, a final clip. Emma, sipping scotch in room 18B, smiling. "We don't need her. After tomorrow, she'll be begging for a job from the people she once fired." Silence. Axitel's executives looked at each other in stunned horror. Emma stood, trying to collect herself. This is absurd. It's taken out of context, manipulated. Morgan's tone sharpened. Would you like to explain the fake LLC registered under your sister's name? The one you funneled company funds through? Emma opened her mouth, but no words came. Morgan turned to the board members now entering the room, having watched the last of the footage outside. Chairman Dorsey, silver-haired and steely-eyed, stepped forward. We've seen enough, Emma stammered. You can't possibly believe this. She's unstable. She's lying. Ethan stepped in, handing a thick folder to the chairman. FBI Financial Forensic Team verified everything. Wire fraud, collusion with competitors, breach of fiduciary duty. Ms. Lane did not come back unprepared. Morgan took a breath, then turned toward Emma. I trusted you, she said, voice low but cutting. Not just with the company, with my life. You were the one person I believed would never turn on me, and you used that belief to poison everything I built. Emma's face twisted, between fury, shame, and something Morgan couldn't name. You don't get it, Emma snapped. You had everything. The power, the legacy, the admiration. And you still acted like you were alone. I earned this. I stayed when everyone else left. You stayed, Morgan replied quietly. Not because you believed in the vision, but because you wanted to steal it. Security entered the room, guided by Agent Lynn in a black blazer. Emma froze as Lynn stepped forward, badge in hand. Emma Sinclair, you're under investigation for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and obstruction of justice. Please come with us. Emma turned to Lang and Dana, searching for support, but they had already stepped back. As handcuffs clicked behind her back, Emma looked at Morgan one last time. Her lips moved, but the words never reached her lips. They didn't have to. It was over. Later, in the quiet aftermath of chaos, Morgan sat alone in the boardroom, the same USB drive now resting in her palm. Mason stepped in, Ellie trailing behind him with a juice box. Everything okay? He asked gently. Morgan nodded. It will be. Ellie climbed onto a chair beside her. Can we watch something funny now? That video was weird. Morgan laughed softly. Yeah, I think it's time for something better. She turned to Mason. You know, if you ever want to come back, I think I have a job that doesn't require a mop. He grinned. Only if it includes coffee and no corporate sabotage. Deal. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. For the first time in a long time, Morgan felt light, not because the battle was over, but because she knew who she could trust, not just in others, but in herself. The storm had passed, but its debris still scattered across the corridors of Morgan Lane's empire. Emma Sinclair was escorted through the main lobby of Lane Corp, her wrists bound in cold steel, her face a picture of dazed disbelief. Photographers swarmed the revolving doors, their flashes casting cruel bursts of light against the polished floor. Reporters yelled questions, but she said nothing. Her carefully constructed armor, pearls, prestige, posture had crumbled, and all that remained was a woman exposed by her own ambition. Upstairs, in the executive suite where Emma had once walked like she owned the future, silence reigned. Morgan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection faint against the skyline. Below, the city moved on, oblivious, uncaring, and unstoppable. But inside her, something had shifted. Not just justice, something more complicated, something sadder. Ethan stood quietly by the door. Axitel's board has pulled out entirely. Their stock dropped 15 points this morning. SEC has frozen their merger rights for at least 2 fiscal quarters. Morgan nodded, eyes still on the skyline. And Emma, she asked. She's being charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction, could face serious time. She won't see jail, Morgan murmured. She'll negotiate her way down. People like her always do. Ethan hesitated. Maybe. But the world knows now. And more importantly, you know. A pause. Then she turned. Can you give us a moment? Ethan nodded, quietly leaving as the door clicked behind him. Moments later, 2 agents brought Emma in for a final request Morgan had made. One last face-to-face meeting. They uncuffed her, allowing her a sliver of dignity. Emma didn't look the same. Her blazer was wrinkled, her hair no longer perfectly arranged. Her confidence had drained away, leaving a pale version of the woman who once believed she'd won. Morgan gestured to the chair across from her. Emma sat, silent, stretched. I guess you want to gloat, Emma said, her voice hoarse. Morgan studied her. I don't have the energy to gloat. Emma scoffed, but it lacked venom. Then why call me here? I needed to look you in the eye, Morgan replied, her tone even. Not for revenge, for closure. Emma laughed bitterly. Closure? After all this? I gave everything to this company. I stayed when it was falling apart. I cleaned up your messes, put out your fires. You lit the last one yourself. That stopped her. Morgan leaned forward, voice low but steady. You want to know what I can't forgive? It's not the betrayal. It's not the scheming, or the lies, or even the attempt to take me down. Emma looked up, eyes narrowed. It's that you taught me to doubt kindness, Morgan said. Her voice cracked, just slightly. You took the most human part of me, the part that trusted people, that believed in loyalty, friendship, and you poisoned it. You made me question whether anyone is truly good, whether every hand offered is a hand with a knife behind it. That's what I can't forgive. The room held its breath. Emma blinked, startled by the weight of those words. I believed in you, Morgan continued, even when others doubted. You were my friend, my anchor, my sister in everything but blood, and you taught me that I was foolish for it. Emma's voice trembled. Maybe you were. Morgan sat back, eyes sharp. Then I'd rather be a fool with a soul than a genius with a graveyard of relationships. Emma swallowed hard. I didn't mean to ruin you, she whispered. Morgan nodded. And that's the saddest part. I think you convinced yourself you were saving something, even as you burned it down. A knock interrupted the silence. Ethan poked his head in. FBI's ready. Morgan gave a small nod. Emma stood, the agents gently reapplying the cuffs. As they turned to lead her out, Morgan said softly, I hope you find something real on the other side of this. Something worth keeping that doesn't come from stealing. Emma didn't reply, but she paused, just for a second, before walking out of the room. Later that night, Morgan returned to her office, alone. She lit a single lamp. The soft glow barely reached the corners, leaving most of the room in a comfortable dusk. On her desk sat a photo. It had fallen out of one of Ellie's papers earlier that week. An old Polaroid of a teenage Morgan in the arms of an older woman, Ellie's grandmother, her former nanny, a link she hadn't even known existed. She held the photo for a long time. Then she reached for her phone. It rang once, twice. Then, Mason Carter. Hey, she said softly. Can I ask you something strange? There was a smile in his voice. Stranger than your daughter setting up corporate espionage sting operations, Morgan chuckled. Fair point. Shoot, error. She hesitated, then let out a breath. Why did you help me? Really? A pause. Then Mason said, because you look like someone who forgot how to ask for help, and I've been that someone. Morgan blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered. Anytime. She hung up. And for the first time in weeks, no, years, Morgan Lane allowed herself to cry, not because she was broken, but because she wasn't. Because even after betrayal, loss, and manipulation, something remained inside her. Something strong. Something human. The boardroom looked different now. No tension. No betrayals hiding in smiles. No whispered lies bleeding through conference calls. Just sunlight. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lane Corp's executive suite, soft and golden, washing the long table in a warm glow. Morgan Lane stood at the head of that table, not as a figure of icy control, but of steady purpose. Her posture still carried power, but something had changed. She was rebuilding, not just the company, but herself. "This initiative isn't just personal," she said, speaking to the room of department heads, investors, and a few curious interns who had quietly been invited to witness history. "It's necessary." Behind her, on the screen, appeared the new logo, a swirl of soft colors surrounding a single word, Ellie's voice. Morgan turned, voice quiet but resonant. "Months ago I almost lost everything, not because I was weak, but because I ignored the small voices, the overlooked ones, the ones society trains us to tune out." She paused. A little girl with no title and no agenda saw through layers of deception in a moment. And it wasn't just intuition. It was truth. A truth most of us forget how to recognize. She clicked the remote. Images flicked across the screen. Children in underserved communities, single-parent households, students holding worn textbooks and uncertain dreams. Then came the blueprint. Scholarships, mentorship programs, emotional support grants, and leadership incubators for kids who didn't just need education, but needed to be heard. "We will fund their futures. But more than that," Morgan's voice caught just slightly before she studied it. "We will teach them to trust their instincts, to speak up when something feels wrong, to believe their voice matters, even when the world says it doesn't." The room was silent. Then, applause. Not the polite kind, the kind that surged up from the soul. That afternoon, Morgan sat on a bench in Central Park. The chill of late spring hung in the air, crisp but bearable. Across from her, Ellie balanced on a narrow ledge of stone, pretending it was a tightrope. Mason sat beside her, a paper coffee cup warming his hands. He wore a soft navy jacket, the collar popped slightly by the wind, and a look of quiet disbelief on his face. "I still can't believe you named the whole damn program after her," he muttered. Morgan smirked. "You think she'll mind?" Mason turned to look at his daughter. "She'll pretend to be shy, then tell every barista and crossing guard she meets by tomorrow morning." As if on cue, Ellie jumped off the ledge and ran over, her pigtails bouncing. "Daddy," she beamed, "did you know I'm famous now?" Mason shot Morgan a mock glare. "See?" Morgan laughed. Ellie looked up at her. "Miss Morgan, does this mean I get to help kids too?" Morgan leaned forward. "Actually, you already have." Ellie tilted her head. "How?" Morgan reached into her purse and pulled out a thin leather folder. She opened it and showed Ellie the first printed brochure for Ellie's voice. Right on the front, a sketched silhouette of a little girl with her hands cupped around her mouth, speaking to a world of shadows behind her. Ellie's eyes widened. "That's me?" Morgan smiled. "That's you. Speaking the truth when no one else would." Ellie studied the image, then reached out and gently touched it. "I want all the kids to have someone nice like Daddy." Morgan looked at Mason, their eyes held for a beat longer than necessary. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance yet, but recognition. Respect. A mutual knowing that the worst was behind them and the best might still be possible. A week later, in a transformed wing of Lane Corp's headquarters, the official launch of Ellie's voice took place. News outlets came, not for scandal, for celebration. The press release had stunned everyone. Mason Carter, Director of Humanitarian Programs, former janitor, single father, decorated veteran. Now, a voice for thousands. Reporters asked why he was chosen. Morgan stepped up to the microphone, elegant in a simple charcoal dress. Because leadership isn't defined by wealth or degrees, it's defined by action. When everyone else stayed silent, Mason spoke up. He protected what mattered. And in doing so, he reminded me, and this company, why we exist. A hush fell across the room, then applause once more. Mason looked down, humble as ever, but Ellie tugged his hand. "Daddy," she whispered, "you did it." He knelt to her level. "No," he said gently, "we did." Later that night, the three of them stood outside under a pale moon. Ellie had fallen asleep in Mason's arms, her head resting against his shoulder, fingers curled against his shirt. Morgan looked up at the sky. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how you can go through hell and somehow come out softer." Mason nodded. "Because fire doesn't just destroy, it also forges." Morgan glanced at Ellie. "Her voice saved me," she said. "She has that effect," Mason replied. They stood there for a moment. No rush to move. No need to say more. Revenge had never been the real victory. Rebuilding was. And in that quiet, beneath the stars, Morgan Lane finally felt what she had not in years. Free, the sea whispered beneath a pale orange sky. Waves lapped softly against the shoreline, pulling and releasing the sand with the rhythm of a gentle breath. The sun was just beginning its descent, dipping into the horizon like a blessing. Slow, certain, golden. Inside a modest cottage perched on the dunes, warm laughter mingled with the clink of cutlery and the hum of quiet joy. Morgan, now dressed not in silk blouses or sharp suits, but in a simple cream sweater, sat across from Mason at a wooden table weathered by salt and time. Between them sat Ellie, her curls still slightly damp from a pre-dinner dash into the waves. She was hugging a stuffed fox under one arm and devouring mashed potatoes with the other. On the sideboard behind them sat a simple picture frame, a black and white photo of Morgan as a child, her hand held by a woman now long gone. Beside it, a newer image, Morgan, Mason, and Ellie standing in front of the courthouse steps, the word "adoption completed" etched in gold below. Morgan had officially become Ellie's legal guardian that morning. But in truth, the bond had been sealed long before ink ever touched paper. After dessert, Ellie ran to the glass doors, pressing her hands and nose against the window as the sky bloomed into shades of lavender and rose. "Can I go outside?" she asked. "Barefoot again?" Mason teased. "I'm part mermaid now," Ellie insisted with a solemn nod. Morgan laughed. "Just wear your jacket." As the door clicked shut behind her, Morgan and Mason sat in a rare silence, comfortable, unhurried. He poured her another cup of tea. "You know," he said, watching the steam rise, "when we first met, I thought you were the coldest woman I'd ever seen." Morgan smirked. "And you were the rudest man I'd ever heard." "I told you to shut up," Mason said, wincing. She laughed again. "You did. And strangely, I needed that." A pause. Then Morgan turned, her gaze tender, as it drifted toward the child dancing barefoot across the sand, arms outstretched to the sky. "If she hadn't said shut up that day," Morgan murmured, "I would have lost everything." Mason looked at her. "But you listened." Morgan nodded slowly. "That's the part people forget. The listening." Ellie came back in as twilight draped itself over the cottage. She crawled onto Morgan's lap and curled into her, sleepy and warm. Ko Morgan, Ellie said softly, eyelids fluttering. Nu nai jo kon kong noi shut up. Kolako samak tatka. Morgan brushed a curl from her forehead. That's true. Ellie yawned. Nhung neo ko kong lang na. Kon kung chang yup juochgi. The room stilled. Mason turned away slightly, blinking more than usual. Morgan tightened her arms around the child. That's the bravest thing anyone's ever said to me, she whispered. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them. The healed and the healing. No longer broken, only rebuilt. And beyond the windows, stars began to appear. Weeks later, Ellie's voice became more than a program. It became a movement. Children across the country sent in letters, some in crayon, others typed with meticulous care, all echoing one truth. I saw something, and no one believed me. Now, someone did. Morgan spoke at the launch of a new satellite campus in Georgia. Her final words were not from a speechwriter, but from her own heart. Kindness is not weakness. It's a strength. Quiet, patient, persistent. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It just needs the right moment, and the right person, to truly listen. The crowd rose to their feet. One late evening, as the ocean lulled the world to sleep, Morgan sat alone on the back steps of the cottage. Mason joined her, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. He passed one to her, then sat close, elbows brushing. So, he said, do you ever miss the chaos? She smiled into the steam. No, I miss the illusion of control sometimes, but not the loneliness it came with. He looked at her. And now? She exhaled, eyes on the stars. Now, I have chaos of a different kind. Sandy floors, missing socks, bedtime negotiations. He chuckled. The good kind. She nodded. The kind that reminds you you're alive. As dawn touched the sea again, Ellie's voice could be heard calling for pancakes, and not the healthy kind. Morgan rose to make them. Mason followed. In the stillness of that morning, framed by waves and laughter, a once-shattered woman, a battle-worn man, and a child too wise for her years had somehow found their way to each other, not by fate, but by choice, by kindness, by listening. And that, above all else, was the kind of love that didn't fade when the music stopped or the credits rolled. It was the kind of love that built futures. Fade out. Final message. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength in its quietest, most transformative form. It just needs to be heard, at the right time, by the right heart.